Ancient Rome's most brutal and inhuman arena acts with women. This is history in the shadow. Please subscribe our channel if you like our videos. Let's start the main story. The Colosseum's roar wasn't always for gladiators. In Rome's darkest hours, women faced lions while dressed as mythological characters condemned to death. Female criminals fought as huntresses against starved beasts. Pregnant women were forced into arenas, their fates sealed by mob vote. This is the horror Rome cheered for, the blood spectacles involving women that history tried to erase. Emperors watched, senators applauded, and 50,000 Romans screamed for more. Main story: Rome, 86 AD. Emperor Domitian sits in the imperial box of the Colosseum, surrounded by senators, wealthy merchants, and foreign dignitaries. The arena floor below is soaked with blood from the morning's beast hunts. 50,000 spectators fill the marble seats, eating figs and bread, drinking wine, waiting for the afternoon's entertainment. A gate opens. A woman stumbles into the sunlight. She's dressed in a costume, thin silk that clings to her body, a laurel crown, golden sandals. She's been made to look like a princess from mythology. Beautiful, vulnerable, terrified. From the opposite gate, they release the lion. The crowd erupts in applause. This isn't gladiatorial combat. This is execution as theater. And in Rome, nothing, absolutely nothing, was considered too degrading, too brutal, too inhuman to present as entertainment. Especially when the victims were women. The Damnatio ad Bestias. Death by beasts. Let's start with the most infamous practice, Damnatio ad Bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This wasn't exclusive to women, but the way Rome used it against women was uniquely sadistic. Male criminals might be thrown to lions as straightforward execution. But women were costumed. Women were given roles in theatrical reenactments of myths. Myths where the characters died horribly. Consider the myth of Dirce, a queen bound to a bull and dragged to death. In the arena, convicted women were actually tied to bulls that were then whipped into frenzy. The women would be torn apart, limbs dislocating, skin shredded by the arena floor, bones pulverized. The crowd watched it happen while eating lunch. Or Pasiphae, the queen who, according to myth, mated with a bull. Roman engineers built elaborate wooden bulls, hollow inside, where women would be placed. Then actual bulls would be introduced. The wooden structure prevented escape but allowed interaction. The crowd found this hilarious. Martial, the Roman poet, wrote about it approvingly. These weren't quick executions. Rome's engineers designed them to last, to provide maximum entertainment value. Women would be injured but not killed immediately, would scream and plead while the crowd debated whether they were acting well or poorly. Entertainment critics, actual Roman entertainment critics, would write reviews of these executions, critiquing the performance of dying women. Female criminals convicted of serious crimes, murder, treason, arson, certain religious offenses, faced these theatrical deaths. But criminal was a flexible term in Rome. A slave who struck her master could be condemned. A woman who refused a powerful man's advances and embarrassed him publicly could find herself accused of something, anything, that carried arena penalties. The Colosseum had holding cells beneath the arena floor. Stone rooms barely large enough to crouch in, with no light, no sanitation, flooded with inches of water mixed with blood and waste. Women would be kept there for days before their executions, listening to the roars of crowds above, the screams of other victims, the snarls of starved animals. When their turn came, they'd be shoved up narrow ramps into blinding sunlight and deafening noise, disoriented and terrified, wearing costumes that made them look ridiculous or beautiful or both, and released into the arena with animals that hadn't been fed for days specifically to make them more aggressive. Historical records from the Roman Empire are clear about this. It wasn't considered cruel. It was considered justice. Justice as entertainment. Justice that paid for itself through ticket sales and gambling. The female gladiators. Gladiatrices now, not all women in the arena were victims. Some were warriors. Gladiatrices, female gladiators, were real, though less common than their male counterparts. They fought each other, fought dwarves. Yes, really, Romans considered that entertaining. and occasionally fought in novelty matches against men. But here's the disturbing part. Unlike male gladiators who could earn fame, freedom, and wealth, gladiatrices were almost exclusively presented as humiliating spectacle. Emperor Nero loved them. He'd organize entire events featuring gladiatrices, not as displays of martial skill, but as degrading comedy. He'd match wealthy noble women who'd fallen into debt against slave women, forcing the nobles to fight in front of crowds that included their former peers. The humiliation was the point. Or he'd organize Amazon battles, mass combat featuring hundreds of women dressed as mythological Amazon warriors, divided into two teams, given real weapons, and forced to fight to the death. Last team standing got to live until the next games when they'd do it again. These weren't consensual fights. Yes, some women volunteered, usually slaves who saw gladiatorial combat as a path to earning enough money to buy freedom. But many were forced, convicted criminals, prisoners of war, women whose families had sold them to gladiatorial schools to pay debts. Training was identical to male gladiators, brutal conditioning, combat technique, practice with various weapons. But the public perception was completely different. Male gladiators were seen as brave warriors. Female gladiators were seen as shameful oddities, women who'd abandoned femininity and virtue. If a gladiatrix won enough fights, earned her freedom, and tried to reintegrate into society, she'd be shunned. No respectable family would associate with her. She'd typically end up as a prostitute or return to the gladiatorial school because that was the only place that would accept her. The relief sculpture at Halicarnassus shows two gladiatrices named Amazon and Achillea, both freed after fighting to a draw in an arena in Ostia around 200 AD. The inscription notes this was remarkable, that they were released with honor. The fact that it was remarkable enough to commemorate tells you how rare it was. The beast hunts. Venations with female hunters. The Venations, beast hunts, typically featured men. Professional beast hunters called venators would fight lions, bears, bulls, elephants, even rhinoceroses. It was considered skilled, honorable work. But emperors occasionally forced women into these hunts as degrading spectacle. Commodus, the emperor portrayed in the film Gladiator, had a disturbing habit of forcing women condemned for various crimes to enter the arena as huntresses. They'd be given spears and told to kill wild animals. If they succeeded, they might earn a reprieve. If they failed, they'd be torn apart while the crowd laughed. He'd sometimes give them cosmically unfair odds. A single woman with a short spear against a fully grown bear or lion. The point wasn't whether she survived. The point was watching her try, watching her fail, watching her die terrified and alone while 50,000 people ate snacks and cheered. Other times, he'd organize comic hunts, featuring women chasing animals that weren't dangerous. Ostriches, deer, rabbits. The women would be armed with blunted weapons that couldn't actually kill. They'd chase the animals around the arena while getting exhausted and frustrated, and the crowd would find this hysterically funny. Humiliation as entertainment. The financial records from these events are chilling. Emperors would pay enormous sums to import exotic animals. Leopards from Africa, bears from Scotland, tigers from India. Not just for impressive displays, but specifically to create novel and horrifying ways to kill condemned women. There are records of water spectacles where the Colosseum's floor would be flooded. Women would be placed on small platforms or forced to swim, and crocodiles would be released. The women would have to stay out of the water as long as possible while the crowds cheered every time someone slipped or was pulled under. The mythological reenactments. Fatal Theater Rome pioneered what we'd now call snuff theater. Theatrical performances where the deaths were real. Female slaves or criminals would be cast in roles from mythology, dressed in elaborate costumes, given scripts to recite, and then they'd be actually killed in ways that matched the myths. The myth of Danae, imprisoned in a bronze tower by her father. In the arena version, a woman would be placed in a bronze structure that was then heated over fires. She'd be burned alive while the crowd watched her try to escape, just like in the myth. The myth of Icarus flying too close to the sun. A condemned man would be fitted with wax wings and launched from a high platform using a primitive catapult. He'd crash into the arena floor and die from the impact, just like the myth. But for women, the chosen myths were almost always sexual or specifically humiliating. The myth of Leda and the swan. A woman would be placed in a shallow pool with a swan. The swan, a large and aggressive bird, would attack her. If she fought back too effectively and killed it, she'd be punished for destroying imperial property. If she didn't fight back, she'd be injured. There was no winning scenario. The myth of Europa and the bull, similar to the Pacific example mentioned earlier, involving forced interaction between a woman and a bull while the crowd cheered or jeered based on their level of entertainment. These weren't improvisations. Rome employed entire teams of engineers, costumers, animal handlers, and stage directors to create these spectacles. They'd rehearse with condemned prisoners, teaching them their lines, choreographing their movements, ensuring maximum entertainment value before killing them for real in front of an audience. Surviving manuscripts from Roman theatrical directors include notes like, "The woman playing Polyxena should struggle at the altar for at least 3 minutes before the knife. Crowd attention drops if it's too quick." These are literal stage directions for ritual murder. The political spectacles. Executing powerful women when women of high social status fell from power. Their arena deaths were designed to be especially degrading. Messalina, the third wife of Emperor Claudius, was accused of conspiracy and bigamy. She could have been quietly executed, poisoned, strangled, stabbed in private. Instead, there are historical accounts suggesting she was sentenced to the arena, though she was killed before the sentence could be carried out. Her mother persuaded her to commit suicide rather than face public execution. But other powerful women weren't so lucky. Locusta, the famous poisoner who worked for Nero, was eventually condemned after Nero's fall. Her execution: she was raped publicly in the arena while dressed as the mythological figure of Alcmene, then torn apart by animals. The rape wasn't judicial punishment, it was entertainment. The crowd could pay extra to sit in front-row seats for better viewing. Female Christians during persecution periods faced specific, gendered horrors. Male Christian martyrs might face lions or beheading, relatively quick deaths. Female Christian martyrs were routinely raped before execution. Their bodies displayed nude to humiliate them and their faith, sometimes forced into arenas pregnant and killed in ways that would harm their unborn children. Saint Perpetua, martyred in 203 AD in Carthage, wrote in her prison diary about being stripped naked and placed in the arena with a wild cow, cows being considered less noble than bulls, another degradation. The crowd actually protested, not the execution itself, but the nudity, which was considered too indecent even for execution. She was given a tunic, then gored by the cow, and finally killed by a gladiator's sword. That the crowd objected to nudity but not to the execution by cow tells you everything about Roman moral priorities. The economic machine. Women as commodities behind the blood spectacle was a thriving economy. Convicted women could be purchased by gladiatorial schools, ludi, for training as gladiatrices. These schools were profit-driven enterprises. They'd invest in training, costumes, marketing, then rent their gladiatrices to games organizers for fees. Women who showed particular skill or attracted audience attention could be rented for higher fees. This created perverse incentives. Lanistas, gladiatorial school owners, would actually try to keep valuable gladiatrices alive, which meant giving them easier matches, which meant other women would be fed to lions to compensate for the boring fights. Brothels near the Colosseum would employ women who looked like famous gladiatrices, offering clients the fantasy of sex with an arena warrior. Some were actual former gladiatrices who'd earned freedom but had nowhere else to go. Vendors sold miniature figurines of famous gladiatrices, toys for children essentially, depicting real women who'd killed and died for entertainment. The economics were coldly rational. A woman's body could generate revenue as a fighter, as a spectacle victim, as a sexual commodity, as a merchandising opportunity. Rome had industrialized human degradation. The crowd psychology. Why they cheered. Modern people struggle to understand how Romans could watch these spectacles without horror. But context matters. First, Roman society was fundamentally stratified. The lives of slaves and criminals weren't considered to have intrinsic value. They were property or criminals deserving punishment. Watching them die wasn't murder, it was justice or property disposal. Second, religion played a role. Arena deaths were often framed as sacrifices to the gods. The blood spilled ensured good harvests, military victories, imperial health. The more spectacular the death, the more pleased the gods would be. Third, desensitization was real. Romans grew up attending these games. Children watched executions while eating honey cakes. It was normalized, routine. No more shocking than modern audiences watching violent movies. Fourth, social pressure was immense. If you showed squeamishness at the games, you'd be mocked as weak, unmanly. Even women were expected to watch without flinching. Emperors who tried to ban or reduce the games faced public backlash. Fifth, the propaganda was effective. Women in the arena were framed as criminals who deserved punishment, as rebels against proper Roman femininity, as barbarians from conquered territories. The narratives stripped away their humanity before their bodies were stripped away. The decline and legacy, the game's brutality gradually decreased as Christianity spread through the empire. Christian theologians argued that watching executions for entertainment corrupted the soul, that taking pleasure in death was sinful. Emperor Constantine banned gladiatorial combat in 325 AD, though it continued illegally for decades. The last recorded gladiatorial combat occurred in 435 AD. Beast hunts continued until 523 AD. But the legacy lingered. The Colosseum's architecture inspired arenas worldwide. The concept of public execution as entertainment influenced European judicial practices for centuries. Public hangings in medieval and early modern Europe drew crowds comparable to Roman games. And the specific treatment of women in Roman arenas established patterns, the sexualization of female victims, the presentation of powerful women's downfalls as entertainment, the use of women's bodies as political statements, that echo through history in which burnings, public shaming, and other gendered violence. Modern archaeology continues uncovering evidence of these practices. Bones showing evidence of animal mauling found in arena mass graves. Graffiti near the Colosseum advertising specific female gladiators. Mosaics depicting women fighting beasts. Engineering diagrams for stage machinery designed for executions. The horror isn't just what Rome did. It's that Rome saw nothing wrong with it. That emperors watched while eating. That senators brought their families. That historians recorded these events matter-of-factly, without moral commentary, as if describing sporting events. Which, to them, is exactly what they were.